Hello, my name is Ottaviano Canuto, and I'm a senior fellow at the Policy Center for the New South. This is the 12th of a series of short videos dealing with subjects covered in my recent book, Climbing a High Ladder Development in the Global Economy. Today, we approach natural wealth, one of the factors of production, the stocks of which help determine the output per worker of a country. We will discuss what can make it either a blessing or a curse. As we approached in the previous video, economic development is at its heart a process of accumulation of assets, building wealth. That is to say, accumulating and managing a portfolio of assets that make possible sustainably rising levels of GDP per capita. However one defines development, it supposes rising income levels and an underlying process of building stocks of capital. Human capital includes the value of skills, experience, and education, whereas produced capital adds up machinery, buildings, equipments, and natural capital. Natural capital or natural wealth includes both non-renewable and renewable resource. There you have stocks of energy-related natural resource, such as oil, gas, and coal, minerals, agricultural land, both cropland and pasture land, forests, timber and some non-timber forest products, and protected areas that can be economically used. While the maintenance of value of renewable resource depends on its conservation, non-renewable wealth decreases with its use. The relationship between wealth and GDP reflects the local development of a wider asset class that one may refer to as intangible capital or intangible assets or intangible wealth, highly correlated with human capital, but referring to what a World Bank report that we'll be referring to in the next slide called, quote, measures of social and institutional capital, which comprise factors such as the rule of law and governance that contribute to an efficient economy, end quote. It is meant to include the entire set of variables that have an impact on the degree of efficiency under which an economy develops. That is to say, rules and institutions that may either support or impose costs and waste on chains of transactions among economic agents. Intangible wealth may also be taken as encompassing the local development of capabilities at various levels of aggregation, firms, sectors, economy-wide. Managerial design and organizational capabilities, capability to adapt technologies and innovate, etc. We approached this in the previous video on middle-income traps and on a previous one on globalization and technological learning. Intangible assets may be taken as responsible for explaining levels of GDP that cannot be fully accounted for by natural wealth and accumulation of produced capital. We also displayed this chart in the previous video, showing the structure of wealth for economies by income group as measured in the World Bank report that is quoted there. The chart and the figures illustrate the path of evolution that a representative average country is expected to cross on the way up the ladder. It displays averages, and individual countries will differ, for instance, because of different levels of natural wealth per capita. However, three broad features may be highlighted. First, the high and increasing weight of human capital. Second, the weight of produced capital, physical capital, stabilized in relative terms after the ascent from low income levels. Third, regardless of country-specific natural resource richness, its weight decreased relatively along the ascent. Although not included in the data displayed in the chart, one may expect a strong correlation between the human capital accumulation and the local development of intangible assets, namely the capabilities to adapt technologies and innovate, managerial and organizational capabilities, rules and institutions that do not impose costs and waste on chains of transactions, which tend to become dense and complex as the economy climbs the ladder. Natural capital intermingles with the institutional component of intangible assets. On the one hand, a scrutinized resource management process, together with transparent fiscal and macroeconomic stability policies, may direct natural resource rent surpluses towards viable investments. Whereas, on the other, policies focused on fostering a favorable business and investment climate may incite risky entrepreneurs to innovate, thus furthering the development of both intangible wealth and produced capital. Natural capital varies over time as it is used. That's definitely the case of non-renewable resource, like the extractive industries. But it may also vary over time for reasons other than its use. The fact that it decreases in relative terms as a wealth component when the economy moves up the income ladder does not preclude its rise in absolute terms because of technological change or new discoveries of resource. So one may presume that an abundance of natural capital, as measured by per capita natural wealth, is in principle favorable to raising per capita income levels. It is therefore a potential blessing. But first and foremost, in order for the blessing of resource richness to become true, over time, the use of non renewable natural wealth must correspond to some extent to its transformation into the other types of assets, other wealth components. Obviously, there is a strong variation in endowments because the average archetype of wealth income progression depicted in the previous chart may take place with different shares of natural wealth in different countries. This is illustrated in this chart by the different wealth compositions as of 2014 among high-income countries. Just look at the difference between the United States, Japan, Norway, Canada, and Australia. But also, as well, among middle and low-income countries, as you can also see in the chart. Now, Matteo Scavallari and I made an exercise some years ago, and we didn't find any clear correlation between shares of natural wealth in total wealth and per capita income. In 2014, 14 countries had with annual GDP per capita above $35,000 had shares of natural capital ranging from almost 0% up to 79%. So there is no clear correlation. And also, difference in the quantity and quality of natural resource may also explain why some countries with different levels of technological achievement can have similar income levels. The World Bank developed country indexes of technological achievements and showed in this report their nonlinear relationship with income levels. That's clear in the chart. Many countries in Latin America and the Caribbean managed to reach middle income levels with much less technological effort than others. Produced capital doesn't seem to explain such a discrepancy. And apart from non-technology related intangible wealth, the high quality of known natural resource in the region, large swaths of arable land and mapped sources of oil and minerals may well be among the explanatory factors. But then the natural resource abundance comes with challenge. Uh, High reliance on natural endowments as predominant source of income and exports means that they are also highly vulnerable to accompanying commodity price volatility, which was the subject of 2 videos ago. This effect is often magnified by domestic factors, such as resource extraction and exploitation, that may lead to early depletion, or unrestrained spending of derived resource revenues directed towards public consumption and patronage purpose rather than building produced and human capital. There have been cases in which natural resource discoveries or appreciations, instead of being followed by a transformation of natural capital into other forms of productive wealth through some virtuous process of savings investment, were accompanied by stagnation or even income regression, generally in combination with political disruption. Weak governance and corresponding poor economic policies underlie the misallocation and mismanagement of resource. Resource shift out of productive activities into unproductive rent-seeking activity when, for example, patronage networks are strengthened where their appropriation of falling from heaven rents. It's not by chance that resource curse cases are primarily associated with extractive industries, oil, gas, and minerals, because these are concentrated point source resource that can easily become the object of rent seeking and redistributive struggles. Resource abundance may offer openings for looting from incumbent governments. Corruption, theft, and insurgency create a fragile political environment that damages democratic institutions. Resource rents resulting from commodity booms may thus be captured either by pressurized or corrupted political elites who can completely subvert these rents for their own personal benefit. Furthermore, resource abundance may reduce the accountability of the government as citizen scrutiny is substituted by politically endorsed and uncontrolled government spending aimed at pleasing patronage networks. With instances such as rapid employment expansion, regardless of its long term sustainability, political elites manage to stay in power after elections. In this manner, resources are no longer productively directed towards public investments, but are instead unproductively employed in rent seeking activities and redistributive struggles, even triggering armed conflict on the extreme side of the exploitation spectrum. Consumption use of tax revenues derived from natural resource extraction through public spending is also a typical manifestation of poor governance. Macroeconomic challenge typically accompanying natural resource booms in natural resource rich countries. I'm referring here to volatility, risks of overborrowing, and crowding out of intangible wealth intensive activities. In fact, the handling, whether good or bad, of those challenges can in most cases be traced back to governance quality. Natural resource curse may thus be associated with governance traits that either precede booms or emerge with those booms. Don't blame Mother Nature. Threshold effects are at play. Let me quote uh, Paul Collier and Tony Venables' book on the left, Plundered Nations, Successes and Failures in Natural Resource Extraction. Quote, below a certain level of institutional development, resources have a negative effect, while above it, effects are absent or may be positive. Countries with good governance are able to afford the human development and institution building expenditures and move them onto an upward path, end quote. Well, and also, as I said, the macroeconomic challenge typical of natural resource abundance, like the how to get rid of over reliance on natural resource. C, the use of natural wealth followed by accumulation of other assets, passed by production diversification over time. Over time, natural wealth must crowd in other activities rather than crowd them out. We are highlighting here two interrelated challenges: governance in the use of natural wealth and dealing with macroeconomic challenges that come with natural resource richness. Given the higher volatility of commodity price, approached 2 videos ago, it is necessary to avoid or at least dampen some potentially lasting effects of booms and busts on the natural resource rich economy. There are the risks of Dutch disease, often identified with natural resource curse per se, but that's only one of its macroeconomic dimensions of change. Dutch disease occurs when a financial windfall stemming either for a recent resource discovery or a commodity price boom originating in international markets is considered as permanent by the economic agents involved. Such unreasonable expectations spearhead structural changes in production, including price jumps in non-tradable sectors, for instance, service, and contraction or stagnation in non-resource tradable industry sectors, for instance, manufacturing, accompanied by a real exchange rate appreciation. The economists created the expression Dutch disease while approaching such effects in the Netherlands when oil price spikes in the 70s were followed by deep sea oil exploration by the Dutch and others. Dutch disease thus inevitably raised real exchange rates, followed by the crowding out of intangible wealth intensive manufacturing as an aggregate of two main effects, which are worth distinguishing. One, the spending effect, where resource rents increase domestic consumption, causing inflation in non tradable sectors and losses in the non resource tradable ones. Two, a resource movement effect, a reallocation of capital and labor that also causes inflation in non-tradables due to decreased output resulting from the capital and labor mobility toward booming natural resource sectors. Particularly vulnerable to Dutch disease are oil and minerals, which are concentrated point source resource that can easily be captured by elites, as opposed to booms concerning agricultural commodities, whose production may take place under conditions of more contestable market structures. Although the resulting higher incomes and increased purchasing power stemming from natural wealth increase may enable domestic consumers and stimulate public spending in development, Dutch disease effects can, however, become a concern when considering that non-resource tradable sectors characterized by their potential to support long-term growth via technological diffusion, idiosyncratic learning by doing, and economies of scale may be negatively affected by persistent real exchange rate overvaluation. The opposite facet of macroeconomic mismanagement associated with commodity price volatility relates to the phase of busts. Uh, Whereas booms may uncontrollably drive government spending and real exchange rate upwards, commodity price shocks may trigger debt crisis. Because the commodity booms may stimulate overborrowing from abroad as a means to fund ambitious public investment and consumption endeavors. This tendency has often led resource abundant borrowers towards balance of payments crisis and unsustainable external debt levels, furthering the economic destabilizing effects of commodity price busts. It's critical to note that the actual extent of Dutch disease effects of volatility and overborrowing will depend to a great extent on policies. For example, on the extent to which cautious fiscal policies are able to moderate aggregate demand pressures, smooth volatility in government revenues, and curb external borrowing. Overall, procyclical fiscal policies and weak governance, weak political governance, not only make easier the capture of rents, but also a poor public financial management that does not envisage necessary fiscal buffers to smooth government spending during commodity booms and busts. As such, it becomes evident that weak institutions are detrimental for growth in resource abundant developing countries. The actual extent of Dutch disease, volatility, overborrowing, etc., can be reduced with appropriate macroeconomic policies that moderate aggregate demand pressures, smooth volatility effects in government budgets, and curb overborrowing. The creation of sovereign wealth and anti-cyclical funds may help in that regard, while also making possible the preservation of the country net worth as the depletable resources are exhausted. A number of policies can be put in place to ensure that low-income countries get the most bang from their natural resource buck. First, high transparency and strengthened checks and balance in all phases of the extraction and sale of natural resource will minimize the risk of rent capture by patronage networks. Second, adopting fiscal rules to ensure that certain investments are made from the proceeds of natural resource can help accumulate national wealth as countries move up the income ladder. Last, reforms to increase public sector capacity through public investment management, monitoring and evaluation, and budget processes are essential to transform today's natural resource wealth into long-term opportunities for future generations. And natural resource curse may happen all the way up the income ladder. The high weight of natural capital in national wealth is typically found in low-income countries. Many do want to expect that they are the only ones facing the challenges associated with resource abundance. Nevertheless, one must note that in most cases of middle-income countries that have faced difficulties in climbing up the income ladder and are trapped, as we saw, governance and economic policy still have features that hamper their efforts to reach the top. There is always a possibility even of backward sliding. So, in sum, natural wealth is basically a blessing, but it may become a curse. That depends on the quality of governance and on the policies adopted to cope with macroeconomic challenges accompanying natural resource richness. But don't blame Mother Nature. You will find discussion on natural wealth in chapter 15 of my book that you can find on those places on the slide. In the next video, we will approach natural wealth and growth in sub-Saharan Africa. Stay tuned.